What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and this time we are here with Elvenking. Thank you so much, Damna, for being here today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it's an honor to be able to talk with you guys today. So, the newest album is Reader of the Ruins, Part 3, Luna. Now, every time we have like these multi albums with like similar titles and they're released in different segments, I always like to ask this question. If a listener may just be discovering you guys now for this album, should they go back and listen to Reader of the Runes with albums such as Rapture and Divination? Like, do you recommend that they go back and listen to the first two parts of this album series, or does that not really matter? A listener could just sort of understand and get the concept with just discovering you now.
Well, it really depends if you're into this kind of concept album thing, and if you're really interested in the story. So yeah, I might recommend to get back and listen to part one and part two as well. But if you're just there for checking the band musically speaking, yeah, just go with this one, and then if you like what you're hearing, you can go back and and listen to Rapture, and then also to Divination. The only thing that has to be said to me is that being a concept trilogy, and since every chapter has its own atmosphere, I would say. Each album of this trilogy has a slightly different mood. So if this third chapter is a bit more on the light side, I wouldn't say just on a light side, but also on a like melancholic side, because it has two aspects, two main aspects. This album that really go on a more light-hearted side, and also on a more melancholic, because of the story, of course, because we're going through a lot of events, and some of the events of this album are from the past, where things were more light-hearted and more without any big worry, I would say. There is also a big part that goes on, with the events that are really sad and melancholic. So this is the main mood of this album. But if you go back to Rapture, Rapture is a darker album, is a heavier album, and probably the most in the album that is mostly in line with the previous works by Elvenking is Divination. So yeah, you might have a whole idea of our sound if you go through all three albums. But yeah.
So, you had this trilogy idea clearly from the very beginning, since you put out Divination. But I am curious because in 2019 we couldn't have seen where we would be personally, and when you put out the last album in 2022, I believe, and then now you're putting this album in 2025. So we as people are always changing, we're always growing, and we're always developing. So, did the idea for this trilogy, did this go through many different ideas? Like, is the outcome of what we're seeing now maybe not what you originally thought of? When you put this album out and the first part out in 2019.
Well, yeah, this is a good thing that she's saying, because yeah, it would have been easy to change the story, to change the perception that we had about the characters and the events of the story, because of what you said. A lot of time went from the first idea that we had back in 2018. I would say the really first ideas about this concept trilogy, up until 2024, where we really finished recording all of the parts for this album. But we stick to what we planned at the very beginning. I mean, with Divination, we developed the first part, and then we had all of the time during the COVID thing. We had all the time to write and record the pre-productions of part two and part three. So we basically planned part two and part three in 2020, and basically all of the lyrics, all of the songs were already split into the two albums. We had the chance to do that. And yeah, there was no changes after that. I mean, we really stick to the story and to what we planned basically.
I've noticed that a lot of bands with the the more folk element, especially when a band puts out like a concept album or a trilogy series, they're always telling stories that are rooted in fantasy and mystical aspects, a lot of historical context. But is there ever a time where your personal life or your own personal experiences are a source of inspiration for this music, or is Elvenking really more or less an escapism from your everyday lives?
Elvenking is, of course, a sort of escapism from our life, and also for our listeners. I think that when they approach our music, they we like to let them enter this world that is, not existing, but we are bringing with us all of the light and the darkness of our lives as well. So it is an influence, of course. If in the past we've made albums where we were more um, our lives, our experiences, our our things were more like we were more direct in expressing that in some of our albums, like Red Silent Tides, for example. But um, even in this trilogy, where yes, there is this, we are talking about this fictional story, this thing that doesn't exist, but still, I mean, some of the characters bring with them aspects of our personality. There is one, for example, that is basically me in a in a fictional world. So yeah, of course, our personal lives are, our feelings, our thoughts are there somewhere. Maybe hidden, maybe no one will notice. But yes, of course.
Do you feel that by having this concept, this trilogy that you were expressing through Elven King, that instrumentally too you changed things on a different level than what we would hear on the Pagan Manifesto or Era or Red Silent Ties or the Scythe, etc.?
Well, I think that from the Pagan Manifesto on, as we always say, we it was me and Aiden that were talking about the future of the band before we recorded and we wrote the songs for the Pagan Manifesto, and we were kind of in at a crossroads because in our past we made albums that were really I would say also experimental for us, because we made an album like The Scythe, which was very was heavier and not what we were used to do with the Eden Reel and the Winter Wake, for example. And then we made an album like Red Silent Tides, which was basically the opposite of The Scythe, was nearly a hard rock album. So after the Era album, where still there was a bit of uncertainty, if we're talking about our musical identity, we just sat down and said, okay, we need to fix this, because I mean, we need Elvenking, to have its own sound, as we did with the first album, which it was pretty much recognizable. We need to do that. We need to carry on that track. We need Elvenking to have its sound and to develop it and to be recognizable for that. Not because one day we wake up and we make I don't know, a power metal album, then the year later we make like a hard rock album. I don't know. We didn't want to be recognized for that. We wanted to be recognized for our sound, for how we conceive music in the boundaries of what we the boundaries that we set with our first, I don't know, first three albums, or something like that. So with the Pagan Manifest, I think that we stick to that idea, and since the Pagan Manifesto, I think that Elvenking is developing, still adding some things in the sound, but still sticking to that idea. And so I think that, yeah, the Pagan Manifesto sets like a something like a starting point, like a restarting point for Elvenking.
Yeah. And also, like, you have a lot of members that all have like very impressive resumes. I just want to mention an example that you have a member. You have Lethian, who played with All My Faith Loss. I'm obsessed with that band. I love that band to death.
Oh,
And
cool.
and like, having members that have played with Moonlight Haze and Chaos Factory, given your history with Hell in the Club and so many other bands, like, has all of the different projects that you've all been involved with allowed you to bring multiple elements? Because people tend to, and I'm not like saying it necessarily like it's a bad thing or whatever, but like people tend to like look at a title like Elvenking. They look at the photo shoots and the imagery. They assume, oh, they must be like a symphonic melodic folk metal band that's on Napalm Records or something like that. And like, but it almost seems like you can't be pigeonholed into that sort of category. There is principles of folk metal, and I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing, but whether I'm listening to Korpiklani or Tyr or Heidevolk or any of these bands, it seems like that there are always elements that tie them together. But with Elvenking, I would say that there's a lot of aspects behind it that are so much very dark for that sort of folk sound, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, it's been very difficult to label Elvenking since day one, because we've had so many different influences coming from different subgenres of metal, and also outside of metal, that it was very difficult to really say what the hell we are playing. I mean, we are always discussing, and we've always been discussing about this, especially when like the record companies are writing the bios. It's like, okay, guys, Elvenking, fantasy metal band, and we're always, no, we're not a fantasy metal band. What the hell is that supposed to mean? We feel like it's at some point we started calling ourselves a pagan metal band, even if we know that usually people is addressing to pagan metal bands that are really different from us, that are really distant from what we play. So we were kind of more focusing on our lyrics, on our concept, on our stage appearance. But yeah, it's very difficult. I mean, we saw this also on the Pagan Fest tour that we just finished in Europe, and we were playing with Heidevolk, Tyr, Ensiferum, and Ailstorm, and we are so different from those bands. Especially from, as you said, bands like Korpiklani, Heidevolk, who are focusing on what we all know that is folk metal since the mid 2000s, I would say, because prior to that, folk metal to us was the music that bands like Skyclad were playing. And Skyclad were so unique and so different from all of the stuff that came later, that it was difficult for us not to call ourselves folk metal, even when bands like Korpiklani and Helveti and all of these bands appeared in the scene that were labeling themselves as folk metal bands, but in our mind they were just not what we were used to call as folk metal. And it's very difficult to to say what we are playing. I mean, what we saw in the Pagan Fest tour is that we could easily stick with those bands like Ensiferum, because we have a lot of elements in common. We may be a bit more melodic. May be more on the power metal side, because we have a lot of power metal influences as well, coming from the 90s, of course. But as you said, we have also dark elements coming from like black metal or melodic death metal. So it's I don't know. What is your opinion? I mean, how would you define Elvenking? It would be interesting to know.
Well, I don't know how I would define you guys, but there is something I wanted to ask. So I just actually a couple hours ago just interviewed another band that falls into the sort of folk metal category from Croatia, Mantra. Great band, and maybe you're familiar with them, coming right next door. But I am wondering. So I come from New York City. We're the capital of hardcore. So Agnostic Front, Cro-Mags, Sick of It All, Minor Threat, all of these bands grew up together. They were a scene together. They played the same shows. They played all the clubs. Take the Massachusetts metalcore movement, Kill Switch Engage, Unearth, All That Remains, Converge,
Yeah.
the Acacia Strain. They were all playing shows together. Now you take the Swedish melodic death metal movement, At the Gates, The Haunted, In Flames, Dark Tranquility. They were all playing shows together. They were a scene together. What I am wondering about folk music is I don't hear those type of, and I'm not like saying it like it's a bad thing, but I never hear the stories. Like I didn't hear Ailstorm saying, I remember back in the day we played to nobody with Corpaclani and Ansafirum was opening. I've never heard a story of like Elvenking being like, oh yeah, I remember playing with Elevite before anybody knew who they were. So again, I'm not like saying it that there's no community in it or there's no scene, but it seems like it is very much like it doesn't seem like there's a folk metal scene, like there's a hardcore scene or a metal scene. I've noticed this with a lot of prog metal too. Like you're not hearing Dream Theater or Yes saying that, oh man, I remember seeing them back in the day and playing the clubs together. And I'm just wondering what your take on that is too.
Well, it's probably, what, because I think that the folk metal subgenre, the folk metal definition is so is so transcendent. I mean, you're not with folk metal. You can address to Elvenking as well as Ensiferum as well as Corpiclani, but they're bands that have roots in different kind of subgenres, because we come from the melodic scene, while I don't know Corpiclani or Winter Sun or whatever, they come from a more extreme extraction. So I don't know if you can talk about folk metal as a whole community, as a whole genre, because it embraces so many different soundscapes that probably is this is the reason why it is difficult to have like a cauldron of all of these bands that are coming from the same I don't know, from the same country or the same scene, as you were saying. I don't know, probably this is the reason, because as I said, folk metal for us, it was skyclad. It was this kind of thrash metal coming from the UK that had these elements of these folk metal elements, because they had the violin and they were playing these tunes that were coming from the folklore of England or of Ireland, and the lyrics were coming from pagan thoughts and beliefs, and this kind of thing was for me folk metal. Then, as I said, it became something else, something different. It melted with the Viking metal movement that was coming from Scandinavia and from what Bathory made, from Quorthon made back in the day. So probably folk metal then became something else, and it created this kind of thing that we really don't know what all of these bands stand for. What is really folk metal about?
Yeah.
Probably. I don't know. I'm just guessing,
Well, I think one difference is a lot of folk metal bands bring in a lot of the culture from where they're from. So Tyr is always bringing their folk from the Faroe Islands into their sound. So therefore, it's going to be very different from the Finnish aspects of Corpaclani or Ansafirum, which is going to be very different from the Italian sort of folk side. So there's a lot of different origin story differences, and on top of that, some of them are different. Harry from Tyr was a folk singer. He did traditional music before metal came to be, but you see a lot of folk metal bands who were listening to Slayer or Metallica before they were like, oh, let me bring some traditional folk into it. So whereas going back to those other scenes that I mentioned, they all kind of started the same way. They sort of like branched out and evolved differently, which is what made them different. I feel like the folk scene, they all started differently, and that's how they became different.
Yeah, exactly. They all these bands are coming from different extractions, so it's as you say, it's difficult then to just all of these bands are coming from the same group, from the same movements. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, somehow there are things like this Pagan Fest tour that is, it has stopped for 10, 12 years, but now it's back again, and it's bringing together all of these bands that are coming from different extraction. Like, for example, as I said, this Pagan Fest that we made, it was running for a month, and together with the bands that I mentioned, that Ailstorm, Antiferum, Tyr, Eidevulk, and ourselves, there were some nights where also other bands played, like Waylander, Einerger, and there were like additional bands, like extended shows, and it was great to see that all of these bands were playing a different kind of metal, but they were under the banner of this pagan metal, folk metal thing, and yeah, these things probably make also people understand that basically, yeah, it's all coming from different extractions, but in the end, it's part of a scene or a movement, that can be taken together.
Yeah. You know what I find ironic is because I've been to so many folk metal shows, and I'll just admit, it's not my first like genre that I go to. I was a metalcore and new metal guy, but
Yeah.
but I've always
Oh,
loved going to the shows because of just the positivity, the vibe. It's a party. It is a
sure,
great time every single time, and
sure.
like I find it very ironic in a sense because the music, including it from you guys, it's so technically impressive. The soloing, the orchestration, the composition, you're creating effectively a symphony. It's not just, not to undermine hardcore music, but it's not like you're playing just power chords and screaming the whole time. There's a lot of technical proficiency, but there is so much fun. It's like a genre that doesn't take itself seriously at all, which is something I find so ironic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like what you say about the complexity of the arrangements and of the music, because yeah, we'll always we also love really simple heavy metal, really simple stuff. But when we write our own music, we tend to try to refine it as much as we can, and have it sounding, epic and great, with all of the arrangements and all the things that we had. We always had that kind of approach to music. Yeah, this is the way that we usually conceive our music. Yeah.
When it comes to like the inspiration for different concepts in Elven King 2, is there like a lot of research involved? Are you looking at other mediums, whether it be art or literature or film, as like a means of inspiration, or does it always come from external sources, or does it ever come from within as well?
It's a mixture of both, I think. I mean, we are all avid readers and movie watchers. We've always been really passionate about books and movies, and sometimes, yeah, inspiration absolutely comes from that. I mean, especially when we read something or we see something that touches, inside, that touches our soul. We sometimes are really influenced by that, and I think that we mix it together with our, as I said, we hide things coming from our lives, from our feelings, and we kind of intertwine the two things together. Yeah, it happened a lot for this trilogy that we made for this concept album. There are, of course, a lot of influences that you can find in this story. Coming from Stephen King and or more dark fantasy literature, and yeah, I mean, it would be impossible for us not to put some of these things in our lyrics, in our music.
When you play a live show now, you're going to have to bring songs from all over the set list, from multiple parts of this trilogy to maybe the Winter Wake to maybe some word stuff or the Scythe, etc. So when you're going all along the set list in a live setting, does that maybe change the narrative in a way too?
Well, it does actually. It's a bit strange when you mix old songs and new songs, and because I think that the newer the albums, as I said, coming from the Pagan Manifesto on, have a certain kind of mood that we translate in the on stage with a certain kind of a theatrical approach, you know. And maybe some of the songs that come from some of the older albums doesn't have the same impact in terms of, you know, being theatrical and epic in a way. So yeah, sometimes it's a bit difficult to make, you know, to put these things together. But I think that through uh, like uh, like through the balance of a set list of a show, you can easily work around that. I mean, you can have a, at least we try to in our shows to have a more like theatrical and more like solemn part of our show, and then we just lighten things up, and we make more you know, like fun songs, and people can have more fun and be less like aware of what we do. If they just could just have fun, you know, songs like The Divided Art of Elven Legions, it's usually the last couple of songs where people really have fun, and they don't have to be super you know, like concentrated, because there are more, I don't know, complicated or theatrical songs. And but yeah, it's a good thing to just work around the set list and have a good balance, you know.
Yeah, and I have two more questions for you, and
Yeah.
that is, one is pertaining more to the subject matter, depending on what the album is about, whether if it's coming from within or external, or if it is part of a trilogy or not. Does it feel like you channel a different energy into it? Does the inspiration or the subject of matter of how you of what's on the album affect your hand with how you play your instrument, or affect the energy that you channel into your voice?
It does with my performance, I would say. When yes, there are songs where I kind of feel like I'm more possessed by the music, you know, and by the theme that I'm singing. There are songs like, for example, Moonbeam Stone Circle, coming from the Pagan Manifesto, where I really feel like I'm being possessed by the music and what we are doing, and it's really cathartic in a way. On stage, it's like it's really something different than a fun song like The Divided Art, for example. It's yeah, it changes a lot. It changes a lot, and also inside of, you know, my head. Actually, I feel like I'm portraying something different. That I'm really interpreting something. You know, it's. Instead of just a fun song where it's cool to see the people having fun, but it's different for me as a performer, you know. So yeah, you really caught that. It's true.
And you led me perfectly into the final question, and that is, we talked about your live performance. Your music is so theatrical. Whether I'm listening to it, and while I haven't seen you live, I know that it would be an epic show. Hopefully, you come to the U.S. soon. But like you are very theatric. But let's be real. When you're in a recording studio and a vocal booth, it's a very static, very controlled environment. There's, you know, you got to respect the equipment there. It's not like a live setting. So how do you bring that sort of theatrical, almost live energy into a recording setting that really is anything but?
Well, you know, it's I try to get the right atmosphere. For example, I see what you are doing with the candles, and you're just creating, yeah, you're just creating the right mood for something, and this is what I usually do. I used to record in different studios throughout all of the years, but I really found it difficult because of this, because I never found a perfect mood. I need to be like in tune with myself. I need to feel comfortable, to feel at peace. So finally, in the latest two albums now, I have a vocal booth in my house, and I set the mood with candles, with the right lights, the right. When I feel comfortable, I know that I can start singing, and I feel like I'm in tune with myself. That is when I can give my best performance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, I have this also just to shamelessly self-promote my artwork as well. But
Yeah, oh, this is your art. Cool.
yeah, thank you.
Great.
Yeah, Appreciate it. Thank you so much. So before we go, I want to thank you not only for your time today and for a really great discussion. I learned so much from this, and I'm very inspired. But most of all, thank you for your music. It's very fun to listen to. It's inspiring, it's enlightening, and it very much deepens us. So thank you for your art and sharing it with the world. Is there just anything else with Elvenking, with the release of this new album that you would like to promote? If you're allowed to say at this very moment, of course, please tell me that there's a U.S. tour somewhere in the near future.
Oh, I mean, no. Well, we made a tour in North America. It was April of last year, and now, of course, we just made this European tour, and we will see. You know, probably next year we will be doing something because we have a lot of interest from the US. So yeah, probably there will be more touring there, and we would really love to because we really had a great time last year. Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for this interview. It's not always easy to have good questions and to have to be able to make such a good discussion. So thank you so much for this.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Elvenking. Be sure to check out part 3 of their epic trilogy, Reader of the Ruins, Luna. We will see you next time on Heavy New York.